We are excited to be with you all for another episode of CaCo Talks. In today's talk, we are discussing consent. After watching the viral Stevie J interview where he was unprofessional and participating in very inappropriate acts while being interviewed, we wanted to discuss what consent needs to look like today, how we should be seeking consent, and the nuances of what consent means for relationships we build today.
Before we get started, we want to mention that today's video may be a trigger for some listeners. We are discussing sensitive material that may be a trigger for some. We want you all to know that we deeply value your wellness and mental health. If you believe our discussion may be a trigger for you, please join us in the next CaCo Talks.
So before we get into our talk today, we wanted to provide some definitions for consent. So in our research, we found that consent is an agreement between participants to engage in sexual activity. Consent can be clearly and freely communicated. A verbal and affirmative expression of consent can help both you and your partner to understand and respect each other's boundaries. In addition to that definition, we found that consent cannot be given by individuals who are underage, intoxicated or incapacitated by drugs or alcohol, or asleep or unconscious. If someone agrees to an activity under pressure or intimidation or threat, that isn't considered consent because it was not given freely. Unequal power dynamics, such as engaging in sexual activity with an employee or student, could also mean that consent cannot be given freely. So, Courtney, what do you think about those definitions of consent?
I think that those are kind of the PC, like what schools should be telling you, and those are good baselines. I'm not saying those aren't good definitions for consent. I don't think they totally cover the gamut of what consent should be, because I do think it limits it to sexual activity only, and we really should be consenting to all of our interactions with partners, romantic partners, with friends, with work relationships. We should be consenting to all of these interactions with people. So it doesn't just have to be sexual. I think that making that definition specific to sex makes it seem like, okay, well, if there's a squirrely interaction between friends, then it wasn't a sexual thing, so and so consented to it. It leaves a gray area that I think doesn't need to be gray. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Consent is not limited to sexual interactions. I don't know how many times I've had interactions with people, and there's something as simple as I'm not a person that likes to be touched, right? So if you're going to touch me, I would like to know before you touch me, some people don't respect that as a boundary, and then obviously they don't consent to them touching me, right?
Exactly.
But that is something that something as simple as that should be consented to.
Agreed. And it's consent is something that people only want to bring up in relationship to romantic relationships or sexual relationships, and they want to bring it up and kind of as it relates to something as extreme as sexual harassment or sexual assault. But consent should be given in all. It should be not fluctuating, but it should be in all of our relationships all the time. I should be consenting with family members. I should be consenting with friends, with roommates. We should all be consenting all the time. There is not just if I'm dating someone, then I should consent to this one behavior, and the rest of the time I don't have to consent to anything. It's because often what happens is, before you get to something as serious as a rape or a sexual assault, even in romantic relationships, somebody would have been pushing boundaries of consent the entire time.
Yeah.
Working up to something as serious as an assault or something, or an harassment. Consent is not just a one-time thing. It's constant. It's consistent. And you should be consenting at all times to whatever is happening with your body.
Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah. I think also, too, a misconception with consent that I've had in my personal experience as well, that is not clearly stated in this example, is consent is not a one-time fit-all, right? You have to ask each time you interact with said person, or in doing maybe even the same action with said person. And it has to be verbal. It can't just be oh, I'm assuming you're consenting to X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
So that's And each time you're doing X, Y, and Z, you have to be like, yes, I want to do this, clear and firm.
Yes. Well, you know what? I was reading an article, and I think this is interesting, and something we don't talk about too is like there needs to be an even broader spectrum of what consent can look like as well, because everyone thinks, like you said, it needs to be this verbal, enthusiastic, but a lot of people consent to things that they don't really want to do just to be polite.
Oh, yeah.
So what about that gray area where maybe you consented to this one action, but then the 4 or 5 actions that continue, especially in something like a sexual encounter, the different actions that happen in there, if you don't consent to all of that stuff, what's the language for consenting at each stage? You know what I mean?
For sure.
Because just consenting to the first interaction doesn't mean you consent to action 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah,
And
it's not a one size fit all.
It's not. That's why you have to constantly be seeking consent and constantly giving consent. Obviously, I think people use that. They use the enthusiastic one-time yes as a way to be like, to kind of cover most bases. But the thing is, that doesn't always cover bases.
For sure.
Because I know I've personally been in a situation where I didn't feel like consent was given to the interaction. You know, it was a situation where I had been friends with this person, and this person had like asked me over to their house. I'm thinking this is just a friendly interaction with this person. Like, I'm just going to see this person's new place. Like, nothing else is coming out of this, right? But then I get there and the person starts like just being kind of creepy and like asking you out and all this stuff. And I'm like, I consented to a friendship with you. I didn't consent to you asking, you using of basically the facade of a friendly meeting to then try to take it to a different level. You see what I'm saying? It's like, I consented originally to a friendly meeting, but you take it somewhere else. So I didn't consent to that. You see what I'm saying? Like, that's when it gets squirrely. And then it's like, and then you try to politely be like, well, no, I'm not interested, or no, I'm not, you know what I mean? And then it's like, where's the language for that gray space? You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. No, I agree with that. That's very true. Yeah.
And that stuff happens a lot more than just the flat out like sexual assault and harassment. It's the squirrely gray area, people trying to push boundaries. You know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So
do you think like consent looks different for like men versus women?
I think so. And I think it's because for men, consent is not something that I feel like they feel like consent, if they do even ask for it in the first place, they feel like it's a one and done and that's it. And it's not. It's continuous. It's something you should be seeking that at all times, at all points in the encounter. Because I think even for men, because there's a huge precedent of men being the perpetrators of sex crimes and stuff like that, right? I think it would behoove them to be extra cautious and be extra asking for consent, especially in this era. I think them trying to take the subtle or maybe a reading body language way out, I don't think that's safe for them anymore.
Yeah.
And
that's why I always say like you have to have that. That's why I always say you have to have that explicit yes. You know what I mean? Just because that, and I'm talking about yes without, like alcohol involved, without other.
It needs to be a sober, clean, clear yes, not some like. You know what I mean?
And not even body language, which I was reading some articles, and it was like body language can say yes because you're like happy and smiling, but like you don't know what's going on in that person's head. They may be happy and smiling because they're just maybe awkward or the situation is making them uncomfortable.
A lot of times
I know
women
me, like I don't. Yeah.
Like a lot of times women try to be polite to get out of situations.
Exactly. Yeah.
You try not to upset this person because you don't know what their reaction is going to be. A lot of times they get either violent, they start cursing you out, they start calling you all kinds, you know what I mean? They start like getting really scary. And so you're just like, let me just try to politely, give them a little interaction and then get out of the situation.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So someone might be
I do agree.
Go ahead.
I do agree that men, like, they do see that one and go type of thing. Like, if you say yes to hanging out with me, then I have yes to do whatever I want. Those are two separate things. And even those things in between, are not even simultaneous to that one yes in the beginning of hanging out, right?
Exactly.
So I was reading something and it was saying like you should periodically check on your partner as you're going through the motion. And keep asking, is this still okay? Are you still on the same page as me? Blah, 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 to ensure that there is consent. But men don't do that. They just don't do that.
They don't.
I've never had anyone that does it.
Yeah, they don't. And it's because it's like, I don't know what it is. I've never been a man, and I feel like they just don't feel like it's something necessary. They feel like, oh, well, if you're already here, so you must be consenting to it. And it's like, you know how many situations women sit in with men where they do not want to be around men, but they have to?
Yeah,
You know
I
what I
would say
mean?
majority of situations.
Majority of situations. I
Majority.
know. I was like, it was like my whole family's heard me talk about how crappy my job was, but that was not a situation. I'm sitting there because I want to be sitting around a bunch of old men. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm there for a job. The same thing with a lot of women. Like, even if they like go on a date or something with you, sometimes they're enduring that date just to get out of it. You know what I mean? And you're just assuming because they're there. Like, you know what I mean? I feel like just a lot of them are not taught. Like, it goes back to what we were saying about emotional intelligence. About do you understand what somebody really is thinking and feeling based on their body language? Can you verbally communicate clearly with this person to figure out like if they actually want to be in an interaction with you? And I just think a lot of men are not taught that. They're taught to go seek what I want, and someone should respond to me the way I feel like I you know what I mean? And that's how you get into squirrely situations very quickly.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and another thing also that I think what they don't understand about consent is our entire pickup culture is basically predatory. Like, when you really think about pickup culture, the whole thing is predatory, because if you think about all the romantic movies and stuff that we've seen, we see there's somewhere, say they're at a bar, there's a woman and there's a man. The woman is usually minding her own business, maybe having a drink with friends out.
Yeah.
There's a guy who sees the woman. The woman does not see this man. The guy sees the woman, and suddenly, like, they do the romantic music. They like slow zoom in. They're like, the guy's having this magical moment. Like, I found this dream woman, and the woman is like literally like no clue, minding her business. So this whole night, the guy is like stalking. You know what I mean? Like, predatorily, like trying to like get this woman's attention or whatever. And sometimes they try to, in the movies written by men, they have the woman respond positively, of course. But like a lot of times in real life, they be like, this guy's having some magical moment or something. And then the woman is like, I really am not feeling you. I'm not interested in you. Like, please go away. And then they try to keep pushing, and then they push past consent because they don't want to be told no. They don't want to be rejected, right?
For sure. And then like when they finally, they don't even accept the rejection. They like lash out on the female.
They lash out on the woman. Yeah. And it's predatory, because they're sitting there like they find someone that they like zero in, and then they like creep around as a way to try to get their attention. And it's like,
it definitely is like a lion hunting their prey. Like, it's just like, ugh.
It's predatory. Like, men do some predatory stuff to try to get women's attention. I'm always shocked. I'm like, y'all can put effort into being a predator, seriously, but can't put effort into being a decent human being in a relationship. Like, you have the skills, you have the foresight, because something else I didn't realize is a lot of times when men have crushes on women, they will watch women for months. Before they even quote make a move. But they'll watch your movements. They'll watch what you do. They'll watch watch where you go. They'll like basically stalk you out before they like build up the courage to like make a move or something. And I'm like, that unsettles me so deeply.
For sure. So deeply. And I think also too that like part of the problem with the culture is that's also glamorized in in the movie realm, right? So you think that's acceptable, especially like as the women gain more insight into what consent is, what it looks like for them, because I do think consent is fluid. It can, what you consent to and how you approach consent for yourself, at some point that is kind of ultimately up to you, right? Within the but for me, it's all encompassing, whether you're touching me or whether it's sexual, whether we're friends, whether we're not friends, right? For some, it may not be that, which I think that stems from a lack of education, but you have to figure out what that is for you. Anyways, when you have, media glamorizing that the men should be preying on you and they make it look all glorious and fun and exciting, it makes it okay for the men to continue to do said behavior, and it makes the women look, makes it for the woman.
They romanticize it for women too.
Yeah, like that's what you should be doing. That's what you should want. Yeah. And it's not. It's not like that. Like,
yeah, that's why it's so dangerous about only living in such a patriarchal world. Is because everything comes out of this patriarchal idea, right? Yeah. It's like even films, songs, books, all of like plays, all these things about how to interact in romantic settings between men and women, heterosexually speaking here. All of these things are written out of the male point of view. So when you're watching those pickup lines or those pickup scenes or whatever, that's because that's what usually some 45-year-old man, well, doesn't have to be 45, but some like older guy would have liked to be doing. You know what I mean? It's like it's a projection. I say that also because I do write. I'm also a screenwriter, right? So I know that all of it is fake, right? It's all a projection of what the author is either wanting to say or something that they think would work for the narrative. You know what I mean? And that's not to say that the work isn't meaningful, because you can take fictional work and make it meaningful, but it's all a projection. So this is something that comes out of a desire. It's not it's what they want to see. It's not necessarily reality. Because if it was reality, why would so many people get rejected all the time? It's because they're not actually seeking consent. A lot of times it feels like they're violating, in real life, it feels like they're violating a boundary. You know what I mean?
For sure. Oh, for sure. And I think also too, like this is why I always say, or that I said consent is fluid, because you don't know past experience is for the person. And I'll say this for men and women. Women too, this consent applies to women as well. However, men are, in my experience, are more likely to look over consent or can take consent for one thing to equal consent for everything. And that's not the case. Anyway, so I guess we'll move on to, we want to talk about coercion, which is the practice of persuading someone to do something by using force or threats. Rape is considered coercion typically, though it's extended to other encounters as well, right?
Yes.
So, Courtney, let's get into coercion a little bit.
Yeah. So, what Caitlin was saying is like, we think of the extremes when it comes to consent, like we were saying. So we think rape is the only way that someone can be coerced. And just for people who don't know, coercion is the practice of persuading someone to do something by using force or threats. Did we already state that definition?
Yeah, I just said it, but it's okay.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Well, anyway, it's persuading someone to do something by force. They use that term a lot in reference to like things like slavery or like forced work. But, rape is another thing. Like it's something that's forced, right? So coercion to me, and I consider myself having been attempted coerced, like actually, like a lot of my encounters with men is an attempt at coercion, actually. And I don't mean that because I've been sexually assaulted, but I'm saying that when someone tries to force an interaction with you, or when someone is in subtle or not so subtle ways making you engage in whatever activity they want you to engage in, that is a coercion. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So it doesn't have to mean that you were like raped. Do you know what I mean?
Facts, yeah.
But when you aren't given the ability to consent to an interaction with somebody, that is a form of coercion.
For sure. Just like, say a friend invites you over to their house, right? And you go over as a friend. And then it becomes something more than that. It doesn't have to lead to, quote unquote, like, say they just try to kiss you. If they do not ask for consent then, and it's just because you came over, like it's automatic, this is what we're supposed to be doing, and they are on that page, but you are not, that's coercion, period.
Exactly. And Yeah, and I actually consider things like sexual harassment coercion as well, because you don't when someone is seeking you out as a romantic partner or something like that, when you're harassing somebody and they've told you to go away, you continue to try to force your presence on this person.
Yeah.
That is another form of coercion. That's an attempt at coercion. And that's really that's what harassment is. It is attempting to coerce somebody, force someone to engage with you when they've already told you, either through body language, verbally, or, in other ways have told you to leave them alone.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's why I consider actually most of my interactions with men as attempts at coercion or either full-on coercion.
Yeah. Yeah, I could second that notion for sure. A lot of the interactions that I've had with men in one way or another have been, we just kind of do what they want to do. You know what I mean? It has never been like, oh, I want to do this. Or like I go into it with one intent and it like kind of turns into something else.
Yeah.
So, luckily I'm not afraid to be like, nah, I'm not into that, or no, I don't want that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
However, that's not the same for everybody because everybody sees something different. Not everybody, women are not taught consent throughout the interaction. Women are not taught that consent is more than just a sexual act or not wanting to participate in a sexual act. Consent is so much more than that. So,
yeah. And a lot of times women aren't encouraged to say no forcefully and firmly.
Yeah.
And I know I've agreed to things out of politeness, not politeness because of me, because I know where my boundaries are all the time, but out of pity sometimes for the other person, because I'm like, oh, well, so-and-so is that's how so-and-so is, or so-and-so might not have friends, or so-and-so might not have XYZ. It does not matter. So-and-so can be a quote nice guy. So-and-so can be have tick every checkbox of what an upstanding gentleman should be. And if they do not accept consent or if they attempt coercion, they are not nice. They are not a gentleman because they're willing to sidestep somebody's comfortability to essentially violate them. You know what I mean?
For sure.
So I had to start getting that out of my mind. I don't see any man as or any potential partner as above something like coercion or consent. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I just don't.
Yeah, sadly. Yeah.
Sadly, I don't. I really don't. And it's because time and time again, because I'm not the type of person to like hang around people who look stereotypically. Like I don't hang around frat guys, or I don't hang around people who are notorious for things like sexual assault or whatever. But the quote nice guys, the harmless ones, because of masculinity and pickup culture and the stuff that they believe in, they will participate in some of these same behaviors. It might be more subtle, but they'll do the same thing.
I think, like I said earlier too, that it's like the masses consume that. No matter how you want to look at it, consent, if you ask me, is in benefit of the patriarchy, right? So it promotes women. You just deal with it. And you accept it, and it teaches men to just keep being predatory, really.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important that we have this conversation, is because hopefully for young women or men or whoever out there, and I know we're speaking very heteronormatively here, so mostly heterosexual relationships, but obviously all relationships, whether they're gay, straight, bi, poly, whatever, need to be seeking consent at all times.
For sure, yeah.
For whatever partner, you know what I mean? We know that historically straight men have always had, who have the most power in a patriarchy, have always had the issues with consent. That's why we're discussing them directly. Not saying that these don't happen with other relationships, but historically it's always usually straight men, like your standard typical male who has an issue with consent. You know what I mean? So
yeah, and I've had a little bit of a different experience. So, with men, I was not asked for my consent throughout the process of anything. I'm talking about just like on a friend's basis versus with a female, I have been. So it's, and that's why I can speak on like the male thing, because I for sure have not gotten that, you know what I mean, there, versus on the other end, I have. So that's from experience.
And I think
which I know it happens, but
I think, like we were saying, I'm not sure that men are actually really taught consent.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of them, it's don't get caught doing something problematic versus understanding the importance of someone else's body and their interaction with you needs to be, it needs to be discussed every time you have an interaction. It's not just like this sort of like conquer thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I guess they just assume like, oh, because you're here, you must be okay with it. You know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah. So I do want to hit on, I found an article, and it was, the article is named, "Make Sure They Know They're in Control, Millennial Men on How Their Dads Taught Them to Consent." So this article really
it shows
just saddened me, because I was like, what? Most of the men, they're probably in their later 20s for the majority of the group. And basically, the consensus was that their parent did not teach them consent. Specifically, their dad did not teach them about consent. Their dad. So they weren't taught consent. So like one of the ones is, the only thing close to a conversation around anything that was him making a very lousy joke. Always use condoms, and if not, deny. Like what?
Yeah.
Like that's like, I really don't know what to say that even is. It's like, yeah.
I mean, yes, you're pushing, okay, safe sex with a condom. First off, sex is so much more nuanced than that. So it's not just about a condom. But second off, just use a condom as if you're not asking someone, you're not confirming somebody actually wants to sleep with you. You're saying, oh, just use a condom and then go do whatever you want.
And before you get to just the condom, there's so much more you're missing. Like, oh my gosh, like the consent. Does she want to participate in this? Like, what does she need? What does she not need? Is she on birth control? Like there's so many other questions. STDs, STIs, like there's so many other questions, for the dad to come, just, that was his sex talk with the kids was that joke. Like, oh my God, you missed a lot there, buddy. And it also teaches, with the condom thing and the deny. If, say, he was to go out and sexually assault somebody, he's automatically going to go back, well, I wore condom, deny. Like, no.
Exactly.
That's not how that works. You need to ask for her permission. You need to make sure that's okay with her. You need to make sure STIs and STDs are not on the plate. Like, there's so many other things I need to go into that fathers are not teaching their sons, basically, and or failing their sons when it comes to consent.
And conversely, just as women, what we were told is just don't do it.
Yeah.
And don't let someone pressure you into doing it. And like, that's baseline sound advice. But it's also like, okay, what do we miss by not knowing how nuanced consent needs to be for us as well? We need to be aware that we need to be consenting to all levels of consent, because like I said, I knew not to consent to, or I knew that I needed to consent to, sexual relationships or romantic relationships. But it really hadn't occurred to me until it happened that I need to be consenting to these like friendships too. I need to be consenting to every interaction I have with people. And so when I am caught in these situations where I'm like, I didn't consent to that and I feel weird about it and violated actually afterwards, it's like, well, I never had any basis for a boundary. That was never something that people thought needed to be a boundary in the first place. And it needed to be because I felt violated. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So another example I have here is a young man in the same article. He didn't have that talk with his dad at all. He actually had it with his mom. And so his mom and him were having like a little tickle fight or whatever. And he was being a sore loser. He wanted to stop because he wasn't winning. And so she stopped immediately, and he was like, "Oh wow, that's all I had to say." And she was like, "Yeah, if someone says stop, you stop immediately." So his dynamic is very different because he was taught by a woman that you need consent in order to continue with anything, and that wasn't even anything sexual. That was his mom. They were just simply playing. So this gentleman had a different outlook on consent because he was taught by a woman about it rather than a man.
Exactly, yeah. And that's interesting, is like, I do think women who are usually on the receiving end of something like sexual assault or harassment, obviously that consent conversation is going to go a lot different than men who sort of generally perpetuate those patriarchal ideas about just going out and seeking what you want and then getting what you want, or the like always a condom and then deny, that kind of stuff. That coming from a woman who is more likely, his mom probably experienced harassment at some point. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like there's a good chance. So I think it's better in these cases to listen to how the victim, or someone who would the profile of a victim, more than listening to someone who's closer to a perpetrator.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm not trying to say everybody's mom and dad perpetrators or victims, because I'm not saying that everybody's dad is like creepy and weird. What I'm saying is patriarchy allows for men like your mom or men like your dad or your uncle, your brother, to easily exist in this sort of ignorant space.
For sure. And I think also too, it's another thing that I saw, but basically, the oppressed is able to speak on something because they are experiencing the oppression, right? So women have a greater outlook on things like consent because they are the ones who are not benefiting from
the patriarchy,
the lack of consent or the patriarchy. So men really need to listen to women when they're talking about this. So if it's your mom, kudos to your mom. You know, if it's someone that you're dating, you did not learn it in your childhood, kudos to them. Because I promise you, this will get you a lot further, first of all, in the dating world, if you're dating, in relationships, if you're in a relationship.
This is
and I'm talking about romantic or friendship or anything.
Exactly. This is what I find so, like, this is what I don't understand about heterosexual men, is they'll be so far ingrained in patriarchy, they don't want to listen to women. And I'm like, women are telling you pretty much everything you need to know to, like, have game and, like, get women right. Like, be respectful, you know, ask for consent at every, point of the way. And, like, women are telling you these things all the time. Just because you're so far up, like, patriarchy's behind, you just don't want to listen. I'm like, you could be 8 times more successful if you just listen to women who you claim to want in the first place.
Exactly.
Which, I'm like, that makes no sense to me. I'm like, if I was a man, like, honestly, because I'm aware of all these things, I just feel like I would have all the women. That's all I'm saying. And I'm not to be like, because I think that's like sort of the pig mentality too, but like, it's because I listen, I understand what women are like going through. If that's what you claim to desire, why are you so against like being in partnership or understanding where your desire is coming from? That makes me think you don't desire women like that.
Exactly. But I think that's the difference. They desire women for what they want, and that's it. They don't desire women for women. They don't desire women for, maybe what they want, what the woman wants in that relationship. It's only what they can get out of it. Just like, there's always the stigma of the guy never marries who he was truly in love with. He marries the next best option. Same thing. Yeah. If that was the case, he would have married the first girl, right?
Well, the thing I think about that, though, is like, the first girl usually just is not putting up with crap.
You think so?
That's what I think. I think the first girl usually the first girl is just not putting up with the crap, because if you're willing to like settle, basically, you had to find somebody who was willing to accept whatever you were giving them. But if the first person you can't approach them with that same level, then you have to lower your expectations or go somewhere else.
I don't agree with that, because I feel like the first one is also taking crap. They both are taking crap. Let's be honest here. I just think that the second one. Yeah. I think the second one is just like, you realize that the second one, like, oh, wow, I missed out. So let me just take this one, Like, you never realize what the true value until it's gone, kind of thing. I think that's what happens with the first one.
I think that's partly true. It depends. Now, it depends if they had the first one or not. If they like actually were in a relationship with the first one. I'm talking about you never had a relationship with your like dream person.
Oh no, I'm talking about if you've had the relationship with your dream person.
Okay, I was talking about if you never even like had access. I'm talking about people who be like married to their wives, right? But then be trying to like go after like Kim K.
Yeah, no. Let's keep it realistic here, buddy.
What I'm saying, I'm like, you didn't have what it takes for Kim K. Number one. Not that I think Kim K is the beauty. Okay, let's change it to Beyonce because Beyonce is a better example of this. But like Beyonce,
but look who she's with. Come on.
That's what I'm saying. But
and that's not to say Jay-Z's not a good guy. I'm just saying, like, he has cheated on her before too. You know, that's word of mouth. But
that's still upsetting. I'm like, that gives you no hope for them. Sorry, these things just give you no hope for like for men, because it's like Jay-Z. Like, where were you going, babe? I know this is off topic, but like, where were you going? That still confuses me.
Great question.
Like, but then again, not consenting. His wife did not consent to that extramarital affair, right? Beyonce did not consent, and that's what made it feel like a violation, because Beyonce did not say that was okay with her.
Exactly.
Correct.
Yeah. So while we're on the topic of examples here, we both recently watched the Stevie J interview, and we're going to hit on that a little bit. So
if you didn't watch it, go watch it, because that'll give you a good basis of this. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Geez,
and also too, make sure you watch the interviewer. Her name's Leah. Watch her interview as well.
Yeah, she did like a post
her feedback. Yeah, for her response. But so basically what happened in the interview is he was participating in some inappropriate acts while doing the interview. It was extremely sexually inappropriate. Yeah, let's clarify. Extremely unprofessional. I think even prior to getting to the interview, when you listen to Leah's interview, was also very unprofessional. But she just kind of states her opinion on why she continued with the interview, why he was doing these sexual inappropriate acts, and her perspective of things, right? Which the frustrating part about her interview is that she shouldn't have to do that, right? He was extremely inappropriate. From the time he basically jumped on her interview, he was completely undressed. And so, it was just sad because it made it look like she was trying to be the victim. Some people were commenting that she was trying to like profit off of it and stuff like that, and that she wanted that to happen to her and blah, 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 blah. But majority, I don't know if nobody, but a lot of people were not putting the blame on Stevie J, even though he was the one that actually did the sexual acts. She had nothing to do with it, Yeah.
Yeah. And she like clearly stated, she was like, I want to be clear that I put this out because I am a journalist, I am a professional. And if he's going to put himself in this position to behave that way and look foolish, that really has nothing to do with me. I did my job. I asked the questions. And, when he used a slur, he called her a slut. So he used a slur in relationship to her. She's like, I checked him for that and I moved on. But I'm not going to basically stop my coin because this dude is, acting highly inappropriately. And like, honestly, I'm with it though, because I'm like, you know what? This is one time where I do think no press is bad press does make sense. Because I feel like if he's going to come on there and like basically attempt to like destroy her, platform, carelessly, recklessly, then she should be able to get to profit off of it. And I think she has been able to profit off of it in a way that she brought more attention to her brand than maybe she had access to before because of his really problematic behavior.
Yeah, she even said that in the interview that like especially once he made that slur towards her, she was just like, it's fair game, because like if you're gonna come at me disrespectfully, then I have no regard for you and or respect for you, going forward, and not to be tit for tat. But I understand where she was coming from, because men just think they can do whatever, and then you just have to take the
high road.
the high road for it. You know what I mean? Like, she was not supposed to put that interview out. Well, you know, she has a brand to represent. Mind you, the deal that she had with that company, you know, that her job could be at jeopardy if she didn't put the interview out, for one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was, in all honesty, I think it was a lose-lose situation in a way. Hopefully she's able to profit and gain off of it, because that's the least she could do after he disrespected her in that way, for one, and then he called her out of her name. So, you know, it was just, you know, at first I didn't even watch the full interview because I was like, this is disgusting. But I watched it so we could talk about it today. But it was just disgusting. Like, Stevie J has always been disgusting to me because of his mannerisms and how he approaches women in the first place. But this just went to a whole nother level. Disregard for the woman that's in the video doing the inappropriate acts to him, the disrespect to himself, and the disrespect to the interviewer. Also his brand, also his the people that he represents, his children. It was just completely and utterly disrespectful. I really hope he's canceled after this, because this is ridiculous. This is when cancel culture needs to come and do its job.
Exactly. I 1,000% agree with you. I don't think I've ever held him up ever as like really respectable. I mean, he's always to me been like a dog, right?
For sure.
It's always interesting why people like get with him, and like Faith Evans and everything was like with him, and like, you know, the people who like support him. I'm like, this man is clearly a dog. Okay, he has never been, you know,
nothing
for
else.
women, especially not Black women. So he's just always been a dog. And this man is 50 something years old, so it's like double ill, right? So, but something else I want to point out about this interview is people were saying like, oh, well, why would you continue with the interview? You should just stop immediately. You shouldn't be on, you know, you shouldn't be continuing to talk to him. And I was like, this shows exactly what a lot of those polite situations that I was talking about, that is how those things play out. She said very clearly, I didn't really realize what was happening until after it had already happened. And he had called me until like 3/4 of the interview. When the interview was pretty much done, she was like, oh, I realized what had happened. And I was like, this is absolutely disgusting. And that's because a lot of times men, when it comes to violating a boundary of consent, they will ambush you, right? Like, she just got on that interview and then he was doing these inappropriate sexual acts, right? So she was ambushed 1,000%. She had no clue that this was coming. And then and then in the midst of it happening, she had to try to process what was happening to her, almost like a third person looking on to the situation while she's also sitting in the situation. Like, that's how a lot of these non-consensual situations happen, is a lot of times you miss what's happening just because you were unable to process it. And it's like shock. It's like we were saying fight or flight. There's fight or flight, fawn, and something else, but it's like you go into that fawn mode, or you go into that like freeze mode where you're like, oh no, this is happening to me. And I have to try to like figure out how to process out of it. You know what I mean?
For sure,
and at the moment, so it's not so easy to just be like, no, get away from me. And like everybody wants to preach this whole like, well, why don't you just say no? Why don't you just kick him? Why don't you just XYZ? A lot of times your body goes into shock. And you're like, this is happening. And so it happens, you're violated. And then only later you're really able to realize I was violated. Someone took consent from me. Somebody coerced me, or somebody XYZ. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And she didn't really, I think it didn't process to her until she saw like because he tried to show her his entire like naked body. Yeah. And she was like, no. And then she was like, you could kind of like see her expression change. Like, what in the world? But she was trying to be professional.
Exactly. But by that point, when he was trying to like, he was like in the bathroom trying to like show her his naked body. The interview was mostly done by that point. So she was like, I may as well finish this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I totally get her perspective, and I think she handled it very professionally. She came there to do her job. She even said in her post interview, she was like, I'm a professional. I'm passionate about what I do. This is what I do. I don't take any sweat for it. Like, I really do the work to do this. If he shows up like this and he wants to put his brand out that way, and he wants to show himself that way, he can do that. I'm doing my job. I'm never going to be, you know what I mean? And I think she did her job. You know what I mean?
I think so too. I think she definitely handled it better than I could have, you know. But I think also a part of the reason why she was able to handle it so professionally is because I think she truly was not aware fully throughout the process.
Yeah.
And so she was really just trying to get to her questions. You could tell throughout the entire interview something was very off about him.
I think
And
he's
she was
high.
trying to be, I think he was, and I don't think like a plant high. I'm talking about something else, something hardcore. He just seemed very off, right? He was not present, which she says in her interview that something had happened prior in another interview he had done that morning as well. So I don't know if that was why, but Stevie, there's a time and a place. And that was not the time nor the place. You knew that this was coming. This was a scheduled interview. Why can't you not plan that another time? Or just, she even gave him the opportunity to be like, nah, I don't want to do the interview at all. And he was like, nah, I want to do it. Like, I'm not understanding at all.
I agree.
And better yet, you have female daughters. Where are you showing your female daughters that that's okay? That's disgusting.
Or even your male children. You think you're showing if he has male children, I don't know if he does, but what are you showing male that this is okay to behave towards women, or even if they're not into women, this is okay to behave towards a partner, or this is okay to behave professionally. That's never okay. And it's to me, what's most disgusting is the total lack of consent here, right?
Oh yeah.
Not only did he not ask consent from the interviewer, clearly, because he just showed up and did this, all right, a total ambush, which again is a lot of times when people don't consent to situations, it's because somebody ambushed them. Okay. So that's number one. But then we don't really know if he had the full consent of whoever the other young lady in the interview was, in the video was. Because if they were both high, just like we said, nobody can consent to anything high. And who wouldn't, who that young lady, had she been, I don't know if she was high or not, but if Stevie J was high, I would imagine she probably was too, right?
I would say so, probably.
If they're high, like, did she consent to being on an interview that way? Taped that way?
One.
Yeah.
I think also, too, you have to take in consideration that Stevie J, unfortunately, has a level of status. And so women are, they're willing to do certain things, not because they want to, but because they think that they can get something from him, right? But let's be honest. I'm pretty sure everybody has seen Love and Hip Hop, where Stevie J is on there and he's like dogging these women. For example, one big one is Jocelyn. Jocelyn really hasn't gotten, too far, especially with Stevie in her career. He just used her for his sexual gratification, in my personal opinion. So is it really worth that? But to some women, it may be. So
to some women, maybe. But like I said, I think they look for women where they can push boundaries, and women who are not as abreast on consent, like we're talking today. And this is why we're having this conversation, because we don't want you to be that woman. You know what I mean? I'm not saying that there's a class of women like that anybody should be violated because they know about consent or don't, or they practice consent or not. But what I am saying is somebody who is predatory, somebody like a Stevie J, and like, some men who we see out here, or some people we see out here, they look for people who have less who are less forthright about their boundaries. You know what I mean?
For sure.
So, and clearly that's they prey on that, because, somebody who's going to say, no, I don't consent to this, or no, I'm not going to do this, or call them out directly, then they don't get what they want. And then then the relationship dissolves in that instant, right? Versus somebody who's more willing to play that game, somebody who doesn't set a boundary off rip. You know what I mean? Who allow it to get to level 2, 3, 4 before they say something, or you know what I mean? Which is something I always find really interesting. And this is just me personally speaking here, is my interactions. Like I said, I feel like most of my interactions with men who are attempting romantic or dare I say sexual relationships I feel like a lot of those have been attempts at coercion, right? Certainly a lot of them have been attempts to skirt around consent. But what I find interesting is as soon as I make it very clear, and I will make it very clear that that's not where we're going, that's not where I see that relationship, suddenly they don't give a shit about you anymore, or they don't care about you anymore, right? Which I find interesting. It's like, you're okay as long as you perceived that I had lax consent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now that you see that I have a clear boundary, suddenly I'm of no interest to you anymore, right? That's always interesting to me. That lets you know clearly that a lot of them are predatorily seeking out people who have lax consent, right?
Sure, they're looking for what's easy. Let's be honest here.
Yeah. I'm not saying this is all men, okay? We'll make that clear for this whole podcast. It's not all men, but it's enough.
And also, women are not exempt. Women can do this as well.
Yeah, anyone can do this. So it's not all men. It's not all women. It's people. It's people are predatory. People are looking for whatever is going to be easiest. You know what I mean? Quote, easiest.
Yeah.
So we just encourage people to know their boundaries, to state consent clearly, and to know how nuanced consent is. That it doesn't just involve this one interaction, a one sexual interaction or a one romantic interaction. It's a continuous thing. It's nuanced. You should be given consent every step of the way for every interaction with somebody. And if you feel uncomfortable about an interaction in the moment, don't be afraid to speak up and be like, you said this was XYZ, but now we're doing ABC. That's not okay. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I do think that it is like women are somewhat scared to do that just because of like the stereotypical man and is still predatory, anger, usually a physical reaction, like you're denying me. Then it's like they feel like they're entitled to it just because maybe I took you on a date or you're at my house. Like no. You know, those are situations. As quick as you can, you got to get out of them.
Exactly. And you know what? I'm maybe this is just how we were raised. I don't know. But I'm realizing that's more common than not. Is like a lot of times why these assaults and stuff happen is because in the moment a lot of women do initially consent, but they don't really fully consent. You know what I mean? Like they consent, like I was saying, out of politeness. Because a lot of women do feel like if a guy takes you out, then you like repay him somehow, like through like sexual favors. And I didn't realize that was because in our household, that was absolutely like, what? That was not a requirement. That was not something. It was like, please, you know what I mean? Like that was never something that was ever like because someone takes you out. Like, and I saw a TikTok the other day where the girl was literally like, she was talking to her therapist and she was genuinely confused. She was like, so he took me out and like I can just say no. And I was like, yeah, you can say no. And the therapist was like, yeah, you can say no. But she was genuinely like, I can say no. It's like, yes, you can say no. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And she was also trying to like make excuses to justify
this behavior. And like, and that's what brain patriarchy is, though. It's not just the men who replicate this stuff. It eventually seeps into women who then protect the patriarchy by continuing to believe these narratives. Continuing to, go with the idea that, I don't necessarily need to consent, or my consent can be nonverbal.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That was really like interesting to watch. Cause I really like, not only did the system fail her, but possibly even her parents, you could say, because to think that she owes them, sexual acts just because they went on a date or they did something for her they're not entitled to your body, period. That's something that you have to give them. And that was sad to see.
You have a meaningful connection with this person, not somebody you just happen to meet and go out with. And I have a theory. Now we can discuss this. This might be another episode, but I have a theory. I really think this culture is really aligned with white culture. That whole, I went on a date, so I owe so-and-so XYZ. I think that is some like hookup culture that has originated with white culture and has seeped into like general society for like other, minority groups. Because I'm like, not that I don't think that black women, I don't want to characterize all black women, but I'm just like the audacity, the nerve of what I see some, like that situation. That was a white person trying to figure out consent, and her therapist was actually black. But just the like asinine predatory things I see, I'm like, if this works, this can only be working on Becca and like Sally, okay? Because I just don't know any black women really in my personal space who like go for that stuff. What do you think? I don't want to characterize, but I feel like that kind of lack of understanding of consent. Not saying it's all totally white or it's all totally black, but I feel like it comes out of white culture. What do you think?
Okay, so here's my thought on it. I don't know if it comes out of white culture, more of it just because I think if there's a lack of education around it, and they say you are constantly reteaching the idea that men are the patriarchy and that you should just listen to what they say, right? So that would be my premise for saying why it's not white culture.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, I think you also can bring into question, why do African American men seek out white women? It's because they're easy, quote unquote. If you listen, I watched a TikTok and that's what the African American said. That may not be true for every white woman. That may not be true for every black man, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I have constantly heard that in the African American community. Even like personally, I've heard that from African American men. They're like, that's just the easier option. They can get what they want out of it, right? So that idea from also black men perpetuates that idea as well.
Yeah. Which
so I don't know.
Because it's like, if they see like white women as somehow easier, then they're like, oh, I'll go for them and just violate their boundaries, which should not be happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I guess when I look, it really is a stereotype. But when I think about it, I'm like, the women I know who have questioned consent that I know of, or who have allowed non-consensual things to happen, a lot of them have been white because they felt like, oh, well, this is what, or they're more invested in that patriarchal idea. But a lot of black women I know would be like, do not, like, that situation would not have gone down like that. I've been like, going where, doing what, with who? You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like,
for sure.
And I hate to stereotype it that way, but it's like, when I really think about the black women that I don't, or the women that I, in my life that I know who I don't think would have an issue clearly being like, I don't consent to that, it's usually a black woman. It really is usually a black woman. I would love to get into the kind of cultural, racial ideas of it, because I think that's interesting. But it's like, it's just, and a lot of times what I've experienced is because I've had I've actually had a decent amount of white people also approach, right? So I think they don't understand that culturally, like they think that they're approaching Becca. And I'm like, this is Courtney, babe. This is not Becca. So that like non-consent stuff, you're gonna have to go over there. And that's not to be rude to Becca, because yes, Becca needs to state her consent boundary as well. But reality is, whatever, little game, manipulative, non-consensual stuff you think you're running, like you think that culturally we're like all the same. We're not. On some level, we're not. You know what I mean?
For sure. Yeah.
That's not to, because there's white women who will tell you to your face, back up too. Like, I'm not saying this. That's not. And there's black women who will go along with whatever. You know what I mean? Obviously, we saw that Stevie J interview. But like, I just, on the whole, when I look at things, unfortunately, maybe it is stereotyping, but when I look at things, I see the black woman very much being like, no. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and it always, I sort of like laugh to myself when I do see the non-black people, or even the black men, they approach thinking like, oh, this person's going to be like, quote, easy or whatever. And then you quickly tell them like, no, get away from me kind of thing. And they're like, well, I guess I should have went over with Becca. Like, maybe you should have. Maybe you should have.
You know what I mean? There's this one individual that I know. She's a white female, and she's very like, I would say she's probably more like us. Very outspoken, like very into women's rights, very much so like into equality as a whole, like even when it comes to race. And she does not apologize for it, even being in a white space. She loves to educate even white people on things like this. And you could say she's about our age, right? But it's interesting because and that's why I can't say it's solely white culture, is because like even her, like I don't know if she was taught different, or maybe she experienced something different. And like maybe personal things that have happened in her life. but she is like consent, bro. Like she's hardcore. Like you better consent.
Yeah.
She's very
I
hardcore
don't care. Yeah.
on equality, regardless of the race you are. She doesn't care. Like she doesn't care your political beliefs, your racial beliefs. So that's why I can't solely be like it's a white culture
Yeah.
thing. And
I don't think
also
it's
too,
really
another thing is she's from up north. And so I wonder if culturally there is not that stigma of, oh, you just have to be nice. You have to accept this because you're being nice. In the South is always like, oh, let me be nice, let me cater to your needs and Southern Belle, you know? So I wonder if
Yeah.
that's also an aspect in it as well. Up north you don't have that be nice thing. It's just I'm getting to what I need to get to and that's it, period.
Yeah, that's
So
true. And then, but you could say the reverse for us is like we're from the deep south, but like I'll tell you just like somebody from the north, or like
yeah.
get away. You know what I mean? Like I'll tell you very directly. So I don't think I don't want my statements to come across as like I think this is how white people behave. This is how black people behave, or white women and black women. I'm not saying that because obviously there's nuance, and obviously there are people who are gonna behave who are not gonna behave according to the quote stereotype, right? But my intention really in saying this is nobody should be behaving to any stereotype. We should all be subscribing to consent. Period.
Exactly.
Right? We should all understand what consent is, how nuanced it is, so that nobody is taking advantage of anybody. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I share my...
And especially as women, you know,
Yeah.
because in this situation, we are quote unquote the oppressed, right?
Mhm.
And obviously, men aren't going to fight for equality typically because they are benefiting from said inequality.
Yes.
So it's our job to be educated. Even as women, we bear the children, right? Educate your sons to make different choices,
Mhm.
and your young girls to make different decisions and how to approach those situations when it
Mhm.
comes to that time. Because that, you know, having that lack of education leaves a gray area where things like rape can happen. Not saying it's the woman's fault or anything like that, but I think if you have the education and the discernment and maybe even the intuition to be like, you know, this is a little fishy. Mom may have said, watch out for these things.
Yeah.
That you know, you can make better choices. You can get out of things earlier if they're not consenting or they're taking, you know, say you're over to just a friend's house and he's like, can I kiss you? Or he doesn't even ask that actually. He just tries to. Maybe you can dip out then, you know what I mean, before it gets too far. So
Exactly. Yeah, I have to say, me personally, I'm very attuned to things that I feel like are like violations. That makes sense. So I will peep stuff very early, like very early. If you look like you might be a problem, that's pretty much a red flag for me. You know what I mean? And the only reason I do that is because in my experience, a lot of things that start out as these like tiny sort of, oh, well, maybe so-and-so just misread a cue or whatever, they become bigger problems. I don't wait around for it to become a smoke, flame, call the fire department. Or, you know what I mean? I don't wait for the house to be totally engulfed. If I see an ember, we need to put out the ember. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
And sometimes people will resort to respecting and understanding. But in my experience, unfortunately, a lot of people have just dipped and tried to like avoid the situation or just act like it didn't happen or whatever. And it's like, that's not fixing anything. Your behavior is going to continue.
For sure. Yeah.
You know
And
what I mean?
I think it's really a matter of being proactive instead of reactive, right? You don't wait until something happens to you. You try to prevent the things from happening. And that's what we need to do as a community, whether you're male or female, and whether you perceive consent the same way or not. It's really just being educated so you can make better decisions.
Exactly. And, you know, as we wrap this up, I want to just kind of, you know, we discussed a lot of things surrounding consent, but I want to give a couple like bullet points on like what consent is, right? So consent is nuance, number one. Okay. It's not only about sexual encounters. We should be consenting to any romantic and or platonic encounter. So that's with friends. That's with, you know, someone a potential interest. That's with family members. That's with coworkers. That's with whoever, right? We should be consenting to all of our interactions. Nobody should be touching you without your consent. Nobody should be making you engage with them socially without your consent. None of that. Okay. And something else I think is important to touch on is ulterior motives is a form of coercion. If somebody, like I was saying earlier, I shared that story about going over to a friend's house. If you have ulterior motives that cannot be, if your relationship is built on an ulterior motive, that cannot be a consensual relationship. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if my intention in befriending Caitlin is only to try to get with Caitlin, then Caitlin never could consent to the friendship in the first place because I took that away from her, right? Caitlin could never consent to an actual friendship. So anybody who has an ulterior motive, that is a non-consensual relationship. Just like I was saying with the quote friend, that was a non-consensual relationship because so-and-so had an ulterior motive the entire time I knew this person. So I did not consent to, I consented to a friendship, but if the friendship is not real, it was never a consensual relationship, right? Right.
Exactly.
That's coercion. So, and then full consent is the opposite of a gray area or a mixed signal. If you feel like you're getting, quote, mixed signals from somebody, and I find this a lot with men, they feel like, oh, well, so-and-so's giving me mixed signals because so-and-so, they think flirting is like smiling at them. Isn't that weird?
Yeah,
but like,
no,
you can
seriously.
smile at a man and they literally will be like, so-and-so's flirting with
she
me.
likes me. Like,
I'm
I
like,
just
what?
smile. Like, I'm trying to be friendly.
Exactly. Or sometimes you'll say hi to them. They really will like.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Bro, that is
like, how do you get those misconstrued, buddy?
I don't even. All I can think is they're desperate at that point. That's all I can think. It's like you're absolutely totally desperate.
Beyond desperate. It's just like, because like some people aren't desperate. Like I've had someone that was not desperate, a good looking guy. I think he just, maybe the people that were coming at him weren't what he was looking for. I don't know. But like, I guess you could say desperate. I don't know. But I was just like, what? Like,
yeah, they will interpret anything. A lot of times they think if you just like show up in the same space as them, that must mean something.
That's
like, I'm telling you, that stuff is weird, very weird.
Yeah.
But so you got to watch out for the subtleties of quote what they think is like mixed signals because they will interpret anything as a mixed signal. Like if you breathe in their direction, a signal.
Yeah, right. One guy, I told him happy birthday, and he was like trying to talk to me the next thing, and I'm like,
oh god.
What? Like and this person that I knew previously, and then he like we worked together. He like left, and then I was still friends with him on Snapchat. And the reason why we were friends on Snapchat is because I didn't want to give him my number. So I was like, if you need me to take a shift, just like hit me up on Snapchat kind of thing. Like it was just a friendly happy birthday. But I don't like giving out my number. So,
bro, I feel that.
Odd.
Yeah, I knew like the job that I was like basically harassed at. They there was these older people who at first I didn't realize this, but they would stand outside every morning. They would be standing outside as I was walking into the building. I didn't realize it at first, but they'd be standing outside trying to like work up the nerve to like say good morning. And one time they did say good morning, and I was like, oh, hey, good morning. And so going about my day, go on. The next day, I come back, they say good morning again, but it's got this incredibly sexual undertone to it. They're like, good morning. And I was like, oh no. I just like dipped in the door, like totally didn't even say anything to them, like totally like remove myself from any conversation with these people. So I was like, they really are taking anything you say, common courtesy, as some sort of signal to like move forward. And I was like, jeez. These were like 40-something-year-old men, bro. Like people who should know better but don't.
And married with children. So.
And married with children. Yeah, that's what was disgusting. I was like, okay. And but yeah, so mixed signals, whatever you think is a mixed signal, if you feel like, oh, I'm getting mixed signals, it ain't a signal. Period. Okay. Like I think that's how harsh it needs to be, is like nobody's giving enthusiastic consent on a mixed signal, right? So
and I hate me personally, I don't like enthusiastic consent. I need yes or no, period. Because I think even the enthusiastic can be,
Well, yeah, I guess. Go ahead.
I mean, I feel like you can be enthusiastic and be like, yeah, like still kind of timid in that. But no, it needs to be, okay, yes. And I hate to even use the word enthusiastic. It needs to be a firm yes, period.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Well, the other thing that I think is predatory is a lot of people like get off on the idea of somebody not actually enthusiastically consenting to them, like basically coercing somebody into like being with them. You know what I mean?
And I also think you can have an enthusiastic no as well. So that's why I say a firm yes. So enthusiasm, you can also get the lines blurred with that. And that's why you just need a firm yes.
Yeah. See, more time than not, I give enthusiastic no's. And that's what pisses them off.
Yeah, they take it as the go ahead because you said enthusiastic no. Like, oh my God.
Exactly. I'd be like, no. I remember most recently, I was telling this person, I was like, I'm not interested in you. I'm not going to, I don't want to further anything with you. Like, I'm not, because this person was like repeatedly asking for like basically like alone time, right? And I was like, I said no the first time, and then I said no the second time, and I was like, just so you don't feel like this is some sort of like lead on, because apparently after I said no, you continue to think this is okay to pursue. I've told you, I'm going to tell you straight up, I'm not interested in you, and I won't ever be. You know what I mean? So I'm telling you enthusiastically no. Well, I didn't say no, won't ever be. It wasn't like that. I was actually very kind. Okay, I wasn't even harsh. I was like, I'm not interested in you. So, please stop asking me on these like date like encounters. You know what I mean? Because I'm not interested in you in that way. So I'm not going to do it. And then after that, like little, I tried to clarify. Then the person was like, well, we can't just like go see a movie together. I was like, no, that's too much. I was like, I said, no, that's too much of a like date situation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
and I think at the end of the day, whether like it's a date or not, like if no is a no, period. Like
exactly.
If I don't want to go with my friends, then I just don't want to go with my friends either.
Exactly.
Personal.
I'm like, I don't understand. I guess they just think like they really are, operating under this myth a lot of times that like, oh, they're going to say no the first time, but if I just keep trying, and I'm like, that's harassment. That's what gets into harassment. You know what I mean?
And you could also say that's a lead up to coercion as well, and
it becomes, that's what becomes coercion. Is like, I broke them down, right? It's like, I asked them so many times repetitively that they just gave in. That is coercion. That's not a consensual situation, right?
Not at all.
So I'm like, heterosexual men have to do better. They really have to do better. It's like, because it's not even like they're winning or something. Like, the vast majority of them who do this stuff, it's like, are you getting any more women? Probably not. That's what I'm saying. Like, so you should probably just at least like logically just alter your approach. You know what I mean?
I think you just need to like listen to women. Like, women are literally getting you like a rule book to them.
Exactly.
And, you just think you know what you're doing. So
yeah,
you don't.
But yeah, to finish out those bullet points, I'm sorry, we kind of got on a tangent, but another thing I think we need to also realize is the friend zone can quite easily become the creep zone. Okay, just like what I was saying with the ulterior motives. The friend zone is really a construct which allows people to really think that people who already have ulterior motives to have access to their romantic interest under the guise of friendship. So if somebody is like, somebody is like, oh, I'm in the friend zone, or I'm not somebody that they see romantically, but they keep hanging around, they're with an ulterior motive, that I consider that non-consensual, because again, like I was saying, I'm consenting to a friendship, a strictly platonic relationship with you, and you have an ulterior motive, right? So that's an attempt at coercion, in my opinion, if not full-on coercion. It's manipulative. So I consider anybody who's like, I'm in the friend zone, I automatically pretty much consider that the creep zone, because I'm like, you're creeping around somebody who probably is, you know what I mean? Because like, who else says that like they're in the friend zone?
Yeah, I think, and like with people knowing what a friend zone is these days, you're in the friend zone, but somebody wants something more.
Exactly.
That yeah, you just got to be careful with saying that.
If you were a friend, you would say, oh, that's my friend.
Yeah.
That's where it would be. But to say I'm in the friend zone implies that you are seeking some other level of a relationship with this person that they are not consenting to give to you.
Exactly.
Which is creepy as crap, because it's like somebody's hanging around. It's like Herbert the pervert hanging around, and you're like, why is he here? You know what I'm saying?
No,
and like we tend not to think about it that seriously, because it's like, oh, well, I know Jake, or I know Sean, or what, I know so and so.
But do you really know?
whatever their motives and ulterior, perspective is, they could be just as creepy as, the flasher on the street. Like, creepiness does not look like one kind of person,
Yeah.
And that was something I had to also get out of my own head too, is because I used to think a creep looked like one kind of person. And then I was like, but so and so I know from math class is being quite creepy right now. So, this is a creep looks like this as well. So you gotta
there is no like one person fits all or one look fits all. It can literally be anyone. So
exactly. But yeah, is anything else you want to mention about consent? I think we had a good conversation about that. I shared some of our personal experiences. Definitely talked about the Stevie J thing.
I don't think there's anything I want to add. I do think that as women, we really need to like do our research on what consent is, what is consent to us, and how it can this dynamic like benefit women, right? And also as women, as women, we are the child bearers. So teaching, first of all, teaching ourselves what is consent and how we would like to receive consent, let alone teaching our sons, if we're having sons, and our daughters what that looks like as well. So exactly. I really hope it was informative and someone can learn something from it, as well as provoke individuals to do their own research into what consent is for them.
Exactly, yeah. You got to come to your own understanding about consent first. And then I would say even, find methods that you can use in squirrely situations or intense situations where you can really say, I can call on that, that behavior and be like, well, let me say this or do this. And that's going to clearly let me know that, and let the other person know that I'm not consenting to the situation, right?
Exactly.
So you want to develop, methods of that. Whether, usually verbally is the most clear and that's the most whatever, but, nonverbal things you can do, or you can do a combination of things like, have a whole little like routine set up.
For sure.
And I think something else we should mention too is beware of the ambush, because like I was saying, a lot of these non-consensual things happen on an ambush, right? Because if we were saying that pickup culture is predatory, they're looking for that. They're looking at you before you're looking at them. Does that make sense?
For sure.
And so when they do decide, okay, now I'm going to quote make a move, it comes off as an ambush, whether they mean for it to or not, because they've already been watching you. They've already been like, you know what I mean? You've already been like kind of stalked, or you've already been observed. So it feels like an attack because they're ready to make that move. But you were totally not expecting that because you weren't consenting to it in the first place. So beware of that ambush type feeling. That's always a good indicator to me. It's like, did their approach feel like an ambush? And if it did, I really seriously reconsider it at that moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that is also, based on your perception of it as well. So, if you feel off about it, 9 times out of 10, I always say your intuition never leads you wrong. So tune into that God-given gift.
Yeah. Yeah. What are you saying?
No, I was just saying, like, tune into your intuition if you really feel that something is just not right.
Exactly. And it's okay to take time and be like, I don't know if I consent to this just yet.
Mm-hmm.
Ideally you're in a partnership or you're in a relationship with whoever who will respect that and be like, okay, well, if someone's not ready for this or doesn't even have, the tools to express consent yet, then they don't. Ideally, that's what you want to be in,
Mm-hmm. And if you're not in a space where that person is respecting that for you, then that's just not the right one.
That's not the right relationship.
Let that go, because I promise you, if he doesn't respect that initial boundary, I doubt he will respect any other boundary.
Other boundaries, yeah. And another thing, be aware of early signs of boundaries, because what I've realized is that people who are pursuing relationships, they will push tiny boundaries first. Itty bitty, very subtle boundaries you don't even think of, right? You think, oh, I'm just being kind to this person. If it's like they're pushing something or they're trying to like get something without giving something, just be aware of that, because anybody who will push a small boundary will push a bigger boundary.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, Yeah, and I've seen how things have escalated even in my own experience of like people who, you know, don't respect one boundary I set and then take it to another level by disrespecting bigger boundaries after I've already said no to the first. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah. So we hope everyone like gets something from this. More than anything, just stay educated, do your research.
diligent.
Also, stay safe out there if you are in the dating world right now, and choosing to participate in that. So it's a hard world out there right now. So
yeah, and you should also be consenting to even being in the dating world. Anyways, like somebody trying to pressure. If you don't want to date and somebody trying to like pressure you into dating, that's also another sign. Also had that happen. Okay, go ahead. I mean, this just became like diary time. Like when you really go back and think about some of these interactions, you'd be like, so and so was really on some like weird stuff. You know what I mean?
yeah.
But anyway, okay. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed. We hope you learned. We hope you take some of the things that we said that you'll apply into your, your everyday life, into your everyday interactions with people. And yeah, make sure you join us on the next CaCo Talks.
Bye.
Bye.